Jackie is joining us today from the National Immigration Law Center, also known as NILC. Jackie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with NILC?
Sure. I'm from Argentina. That's where all my family lives. And I've been working in the immigrant rights movement for, I'm about to give away my age, about 25 years. Um, so, yeah, old enough that I'm nearing not being able to apply for DACA anymore. And I oversee our economic justice program. So NILC does a number of things. We do litigation, so the Daca lawsuit, that's NILC, the Muslim ban lawsuit, and also the public charge litigation, which we're going to talk about today. But we also do work doing organizing and advocacy to try and change the laws, and doing education for immigrant communities. So that's what we're here to do, to talk about education.
Yeah, and especially coming to this conversation. So I actually helped to draft the public charge guide for when the rule was first announced, for the guide that we have on informed immigrant, not like the policy. But the guide
I was gonna say, I didn't realize you worked for the Trump administration.
No, God, no. But for the FAQ guide that we have on our page, and I remember when the rule was first announced, like it was so confusing. And to this day, like sometimes I go back to the actual guide and the FAQ guide, and I'm like, that's right, that's what that means, and that's the program that's on there. So I know how extremely confusing it is, especially since there was so much back and forth on it. But before we go into the full dive of it, can you tell us what public charge is?
Yeah, public charge. What a weird word that is. So basically, when we had the public charge idea is about 100 years old. And when we had our first public charge in the American immigration law, it was actually targeted against Irish immigrants. So they thought that Irish immigrants were actually a different race, and they were trying to keep Irish from coming in and tainting the gene pool of the United States. Just a reminder that, things change, and people who once were considered to not be white are now considered white. And, that there's a long history of discrimination based on race. The Irish, as people can remember, if you go back to your old history classes, were fleeing the potato famine. They were coming here because, crops had died and they were starving. And so they came to the United States seeking a better future. And they had no money. And so the United States wanted to deny them to come in, and to be able to, immigrate to the United States if anyone was likely to become a public charge, which means someone who was likely to become primarily dependent on the government, someone who was not going to have any money, who was going to end up, needing assistance. And so that's really what it was. And for many years, public charge was really, and just as a reminder, this was also part of the same bill that excluded a number of people. It excluded people with mental health issues. It excluded people with disabilities. It excluded homosexuals. It excluded anarchists and communists. Like there was a whole different list of people who the United States was trying to exclude. But public charge was really about keeping the Irish out. And so, I think it's important for us to remember, it's not that they're trying to keep Latinos out and communities of color out, African immigrants, it really is a longer history, and people often whose families came here and when the United States was trying to keep them out are some of the same people who are arguing that the new generations shouldn't come in. So for many years, a lot of people never heard about this before, because the way it worked out was the only definition was public charge was someone who was going to become primarily dependent on the government for assistance. And so the only two things you had to worry about if you were coming are if you received cash assistance, or if you received long-term care, like if you were in a hospital, like paid for by the government for a really long time. As long as you didn't get cash for the government and you weren't in a hospital for a really long time, you didn't have to worry about public charge. And as many of us who are immigrants and our families are immigrants know, you're not eligible for anything when you're an immigrant in most cases. And so I don't know what cash they thought we were going to be getting. Because as most people know, you have to have a green card and be here for 5 years in almost all cases in order to be eligible for any government benefits. So I think that's another important thing to remind folks, that a lot of us aren't eligible until we already have our green cards. And it's also important to remember, again, that public charge test only happens at very specific times, right? So there's not, there's not like a public charge test that just happens. I'm not like an immigrant walking down the street and suddenly ICE can come up and be like, we're about to give you a public charge test. No, that's not how it works. You only take a public charge test when you're applying for your green card, right? You don't take a public charge test when you're applying for citizenship, or at any other moment. So unless you already have your green card, you're not going to be eligible for many of the benefits that until the Trump administration would make you become a public charge. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. It's really about keeping out people. It's a wealth test. It's really about keeping out people who are low income and people who need support, which were many of us and many of our families.
So you did touch a little bit on what the rule used to be like. Can you tell us what exactly is new about the rule and what programs fall under the public charge rule?
Absolutely. So I think that there's two things. As I mentioned, people often focus like a little bit too much on the programs. There's also a thing called the totality of circumstances test, which I'll tell you about. But like I said, if you're taking a green card test in the first place, you aren't eligible for the programs. But what changed under Trump is, as I mentioned before, the only two benefits that counted until Trump became president were cash and care. You're not in the hospital, you're not getting cash money, you're not a public charge. He wanted to change it. And also, like in the middle of a pandemic, we see how absolutely ridiculous this is. And he added a few new benefits. So what Trump did is he added beyond cash, which is still one of the programs. He added Medicaid. So that's only if you receive Medicaid, and again, not for children, but if you're an adult who receives Medicaid. He added SNAP or food stamps, and he added housing. So those were added to the public charge test, again, in the middle of a pandemic, right? I think another thing that is important is, if you guys remember what I said was the earlier definition of public charge, which was someone who is likely to become primarily dependent on the government for assistance. How many of us have maybe had to be on Medicaid for a little bit or get food stamps during a rough patch, but we weren't primarily dependent? I mean, food stamps don't, many of us are working full-time jobs or working jobs and yet still also need a little bit of support to get by, especially during these really hard times. And I will talk a little bit about COVID and how the rules are a little bit different now. But so as a reminder, if I didn't mention, what those pieces, cash, hospital or care, Medicaid, SNAP, or housing, they don't count. All right. So when people ask me all the time, well, what if I get like a Pell Grant to go to school? No, I didn't mention that. It's cash, it's hospitals, it's food stamps, it's Medicaid, and it's housing. If I didn't mention them, they don't count. So that's just a really important thing for people to know. And again, as I mentioned over and over again, you usually need to have a green card in order to qualify for any of those anyway. And that's what changed. So the other thing that changed is he also created what's called the totality of circumstances test. So like I said, if you're someone who is an adult and you're using one of these benefits, you're probably already a green card holder, but the test doesn't just look at whether or not you use benefits. It looks at whether or not you meet what's a number of different factors, and they do a little equation, and we have no idea how they're going to do the math for this. They look at things that they call heavily weighted factors and negatively weighted factors. And the factors that are counted against you are things like you don't have a job, you don't speak English fluently, right? And again, this is so unfair because so many of us come to this country and maybe we didn't, my parents didn't speak English when they came here. English is my second language, but I eventually learned it and I, got ahead. So it's so unfair that even to get a chance to be here, you'd be penalized for not speaking English when you get here. They also apply the public charge test when you're applying for any kind of visa, like a tourist visa or something like that. So if you have a negative health condition, if you are, have a disability, if you are a person who's earning less than 250% of the federal poverty level. So if you're like a family of three and you're earning like $60,000, if you're a low income person, they're going to count that against you in the public charge test. And so I think that that's just important to note that it's a really complicated test and we don't really know how they're going to do the math. It's not like I can plug in, I don't speak English, I don't have a job, I have a health condition, and I can give you like a magic number. It's going to really be all in the hands of, the person who's making the decision about your test, the immigration official. As I'll mention in a second, the rule hasn't, the rule doesn't apply to many people. And also we're going to try and fight it, and we're fighting it in the courts. And as you all know, Trump is on his way out. But that's an important thing to mention soon, as well. But like, just as a reminder, again, since so many folks, when they think about public charge, they think about benefits, it's important for them to remember that the only ones that count are cash, hospital, SNAP, Medicaid, and housing. If I didn't mention it, doesn't count. Go ahead.
Yeah. And for folks who maybe didn't write it down or forget this and need to revisit it, NILC has amazing resources that cover everything that Jackie's talking about for public charge. There's also an FAQ guide on informedimmigrant.com. If you need that in Spanish, we have it on Inmigrante Informado. NILC also has it on their platform as well. So just in case you forget, we have a ton of resources that you can find from different platforms that are trying to make it as easy as possible to understand this. But Jackie, you did talk about the programs that do fall under it. And I think you touched upon like who the rule applies to, but can you remind folks who the public charge rule applies to?
Absolutely. And there's lots of people to whom the rule doesn't apply to. And the other thing that's important to remember is it doesn't apply to the citizenship test. So I know lots of folks in my community, have their green cards and they've been here for a long time, but maybe they haven't become a citizen yet. There is no public charge test for the when you naturalize, when you apply to become a citizen. So other folks, again, so once you have your green card, no more public charge test. Also, if you are a refugee or an asylee, there is no public charge test. If you're a VAWA self-petitioner, who's someone who's petitioning under the Violence Against Women Act, who's a survivor of domestic violence, that is not applying a public charge test to you. People who survive trafficking or other serious crimes, such as U and T visa applicants. People who are special immigrant juveniles, people who have SIDG status, which are unaccompanied minors, doesn't count. And there's also a bunch of other categories that don't count. So as I'm going to tell you later, one, don't try and be an immigration attorney on this, because, it's like, there's some things I can tell you for sure, right? Like, which is, if you're a citizen, you don't have to worry about this. If you're someone who already has a green card, you have to worry about this. If you're in any one of those categories, you don't have to worry about this. But I think many people mistakenly think that public charge test applies to them, and it doesn't. And so I think that we really want to mention that there are tons of people that don't have to worry about public charge. And also, the benefits used by family members don't count. So the thing that I find most often is like two parents maybe, and one of the parents is like a citizen and the other one's applying for their green card, and their kid is a US citizen, and they'll take their kid off of SNAP or Medicaid, which is really sad, but actually that doesn't count for, for the case of the parent, right? They're only going to count the benefits that the individual applying for the green card uses, not the benefits used by their family members. So that's really crucial, because I would say the biggest challenges I see are green card holders who are getting off of benefits because they mistakenly think that it applies to the citizenship test. And the second biggest problem I see is family members who are taking their kids off of benefits or their family members off of benefits when that kid isn't even applying for the test, and in many cases is a US citizen. So we really need to get the word out to families that it's safe for family members who are not applying for green cards to access benefits they have every right to.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that the administration was kind of hoping for, or did a great job at, was making this rule so complicated and so hard to understand. And they just like threw in so much stuff in there that it confused a lot of immigrant families, and it created a lot of fear that this would count against them if they were using some of these programs, or if their kids who are US citizens who qualify for these programs were using it too. And it's very unfortunate, because I know that immediately after the rule came out, that a lot of folks did go and take their families, to take these benefits away from their families, even though they're legally able to use those without it counting against them. But I think one of the things that we also wanted to clarify for folks that maybe are just tuning in, we're talking about public charge. There's been a lot of back and forth federally when it comes to this rule, and like the amount of times that it's changed, and it's been in effect, not in effect, different per state, etc. It's important to clarify, is the rule currently in effect right now?
Right. So, the important thing to remember again is that this only counts, we don't really actually know how this is all going to work out. And it does not count if you've used this in the past, right? And so I think that that's another thing that people are really confused about, that they think that, oh, you know, if anyone, 10 years ago used a benefit, that's going to impact them or something like that. But really, we're talking about applications that were postmarked after February 20th, 2020. And, again, if there's any situation in which, sort of you're talking about a past application or one that is, in limbo and so forth, I think that it's important for folks to remember that does not apply to you. Again, and so someone just said new Daca applicants. Again, so it's right now we're waiting to find out. This is currently sort of being in the courts. We're continuing to fight it. So we're hoping to stop it in the coming years. And we really don't actually know how they're applying the test very well. But again, it's effective for anyone who's applying after February 24th, 2020. But even as recently as a few days ago, we had a good court ruling, saying that it shouldn't go into effect. So I think the most important thing to do is, if you're someone who's currently has an application pending, be really in close conversation with your immigration attorney. And also, no matter where you are, we can connect you to an immigration attorney. And if you're not someone who's applying for a green card, then this is largely something you don't, have to worry about. Again, if you're a citizen or if your family member is applying. So that's important to know.
Yeah, and then thank you for explaining that and answering some of the questions as they're coming in, Jackie. I know you touched upon this a little bit earlier, but for folks who might just be joining again, should undocumented immigrants with U.S. citizen kids drop out of the programs that they're currently using? Because I know that that's one of the number one questions that we get when it comes to public charge.
Again, the programs that I just mentioned are Medicaid, they are SNAP or food stamps, they are housing assistance such as Section 8, they are cash assistance, which is also called TANF, they are hospitalization for long-term care, which is maybe one slight exception, but undocumented immigrants are not eligible for any of those benefits that I just mentioned, right? The problem for undocumented immigrants who, let's say they get a chance to adjust their status in the future, is not going to be that they use benefits, right? The problem is going to be that they're low income, right? Because I mentioned it's not just the use of benefits that counts. They're going to look at all of your circumstances, and the circumstances they're going to look at is if you're earning very little money. They're going to look at if you're very young or if you're very old. They're going to look at if you have health conditions. They're going to look at if you're employed. All those things are going to be part of the test. But if you're undocumented, really, you're not eligible for any of the benefits. So I think one of the things I've been trying to be really focused on over the last, my goodness, it's been almost 4 years we've been fighting this, is that people have mistakenly been focusing on the use of benefits. And that's not the largest issue for most people. The issue for most people is going to be whether or not they earn too little, right? If you're even income eligible for those benefits, you probably are going to be in trouble even if you don't use them, because they're going to look at how little money you earned. And again, this is a huge change from before Trump, because before you'd only have to worry about public charge if you got cash. Now you potentially could have to worry even if you didn't get cash, if you earned very little money. You know what I mean? So you don't even have to do anything. You just have to be, that's why we don't call it the public charge test. We call it the wealth test, right? And we also call it the test it disproportionately impacts people that are coming from countries where English isn't their first language. So if you were lucky enough that the British colonized you and you already speak English, then lucky for you. If you're from the countries like I'm from, where, where the Spaniards colonized us, or the French or the Belgians or whatever, you know what I mean? Why should you get more preference if you happen to be from a country that speaks English, right? And that's why when Trump said the kind of immigrants he wants are, PhDs from Norway, right? Let's be very clear about the kind of immigrant he wants. The kind of immigrant he wants are white people from Europe, right? Rich white people.
Yeah, and then I just want to add in for folks who are joining us that, if you have a parent or a family member who speaks Spanish that you feel like they could benefit from knowing this information, or having an opportunity to ask any types of questions for Jackie, we'll be hosting this exact same conversation in Spanish on Facebook on Tuesday at 6 o'clock Eastern. It'll just be on Facebook, as I mentioned, so just make sure you're following the Informed Immigrant account, and Jackie will be joining us, and it'll be a Q&A conversation exactly how it's going right now. So go ahead and share that, or tell folks and friends, because I know that when it comes to this rule, it becomes confusing pretty quickly. So it's a great opportunity to be able to ask some questions, or get some clarity from an expert like Jackie.
And it won't go exactly like this one, because there's not going to be a delay in me logging in, because now I know how to use now I know how to use Instagram, and it's going to be on Facebook. So
yeah, that one will be a little bit easier to join as well. But I think as a reminder for folks who already have green cards and plan on applying for citizenship, does this impact them?
no, it doesn't. So again, you already have a green card, you're on benefits. There's no benefit to getting off of your benefits. There's no benefit. It's not going to help your case to have your kid get off of the benefits, right? Like those things do not count as part of the public charge test. And as you were mentioning as well, I think that the other piece is this is so confusing, right? I can't explain this to you in one sentence. I can tell you which are the benefits that count and don't count. But as I mentioned, that the benefits aren't really the point. The real issue is this like totality of circumstances test, where we're talking about how much money you make, and if you speak English, and if you have a job, and whatever. Like the point, the confusion is the point when it comes to public charge, right? Trump wanted to do this so that people who were eligible and had every right for benefits to get off of the benefits that they need to make their families strong and healthy, because they're scared and they're confused. And to be honest, when you look at who was impacted by the public charge rule that just went into that like has been pending for many years, people were getting off of benefits because they were scared of public charge even before the rule went into effect, right? And so I think that that's like a really important thing to know, that the more that we spread confusion and misinformation about public charge, the more that we scare our family members to get off of programs that they need to be healthier and stronger, the more we're doing the Trump administration's work for them, right? Like that's the point, and the rule is 800 pages long, okay? Yeah. Like, it was like this on my desk, right? And so even immigration lawyers, to be honest, don't really understand it all the way, because it's so confusing, and because I know you'll be very surprised to hear this, but the Trump administration also made a lot of errors inside their rule. I know it's shocking that this administration, who's been so good at getting details right, and never making any mistakes, made mistakes in it. It was great for our lawsuits, but the point is that it's confusing, and you don't have to be confused, right? There are some things that are not confusing, which is it doesn't apply to people who already have green card holders, it doesn't apply to citizens, and it doesn't apply to the kids and family members of people who are applying for green card holders. And that's information we really need you guys to get out and share with your communities.
Yeah, and if folks need something to share to friends or family, NILC has really great resources on their website. Informed Immigrant also has an FAQ guide in regards to public charge. You can find that at informedimmigrant.com, inmigranteinformado.com for Spanish. And we actually link back to NILC's resources as well. So if you just want to go in and grab some of those, you can download them, print them, share a link, etc. So really there's a lot of work that organizations are doing to make sure that the immigrant community is informed and that they know what's happening, because as I mentioned earlier, the rule is just written in such a way that it becomes confusing, and there's been so much back and forth on the program that it's hard to follow. I get confused, and like I'm following this a little bit more closely. So I would not be surprised if the folks that are directly impacted get confused by this and get intimidated, and out of fear drop out from programs that they should be using and that they qualify for, which is really unfortunate. But as Jackie mentioned, it was one of the goals for the administration. So as community members, as allies, folks who are directly impacted, we have to do our work to make sure that our communities aren't continuing to be taken advantage of. So again, going back to some of the questions, I think one of the more important ones, especially because we're in the middle of a pandemic and the immigrant community is afraid and thinks that, the public charge is going to somehow like come turn around and like hurt them in a way that they might not be able to recover from. So I guess my question is, for folks that maybe might be seeking help for COVID, will the public charge rule apply for them when it comes to this specifically? And then I'll have a follow-up question.
So I mean, ICE has been very clear. Any programs or benefits that are used to treat or do testing for COVID-19 do not count as the public charge rule. Someone just mentioned PEBT. I'll talk about that as well. But yeah, absolutely, those do not count. It's hard to trust ICE because, ICE lies, yes. But they do have it very clearly on their website that they will not count any type of COVID-19 related programs as part of the public charge test, and that they will not be conducting enforcement activities at testing sites, at treatment sites, and in hospitals. And the hospitals and clinics were all, medical facilities were already excluded from enforcement actions by ICE under the sensitive locations memo. So they're not supposed to be doing enforcement there anyway. And every time I tell someone that, everyone says, wait, I heard about, my prima told me about someone. You know, there have been cases, okay? ICE has broken its word, much like Trump has broken his word. But honestly, I can count them on one hand, right? And I think it's really important, again, when I said that the point is the confusion and the point is the fear, if we are letting them scare us away from getting access to treatment that can save our lives, we're letting them scare us out of our own lives, right? And so we need to, you know, while there have been infractions, for the most part, it's been a really long time since ICE has engaged in any kind of shenanigans at, you know, like a hospital or anything like that. And honestly, there are very, very few exceptions. And so we really need to tell our communities that it's safe to get healthcare, that we cannot be dying, you know, because we are scared to go to a hospital, get treatment ever, but especially under a global pandemic. And so that's an important thing to know. And also that the PEBT, so for folks who don't know, pandemic EBT is a card that people got. And as I mentioned, you know, when I said, what are the, if we do this live, I can ask you guys to all shout out, what are the benefits that count? Again, cash, hospital, food stamps, housing, and what did I miss? Oh my gosh, I think that was it. And Medicaid. What I did not say, I said food stamps. I did not say school meals, and I did not say pandemic EBT. So your kids, if you're a kid, if you have family members that have kids, if you have kids of your own, it is totally safe for them to use school meals. And pandemic EBT, it has no immigration restrictions. And it is totally safe to use, and it is not part of the public charge test. No disaster relief programs are part of the public charge test. What we've heard, which is really heartbreaking, is that a lot of immigrant families, and it really depended how PEBT worked in your state, but in some states, they actually mailed out the PEBT card. And so I know, you know, in many Latino communities, they looked at it and they said, oh my gosh, no, son las estampillas, es la, you know, that's the cupones. Like, we can't use that because that's food stamps, because it's, you know, people got confused between pandemic EBT and food stamps, but that's not true. Pandemic EBT is there to provide food for kids who are out of school during a pandemic and a global disaster, and they should feel absolutely safe to use PEBT. So please, you know, get the word out there. You know, we have to keep fighting to make sure, especially now, I mean, at any time, no kid should be scared of using school meals, right? They're for children, but at the same time, under a pandemic where kids are not going to school, where so many kids get their meals, PEBT was supposed to be there as a lifeline, and it has no immigration restrictions, and families should be absolutely comfortable using it with no fear.
Yeah. And so again, for folks that maybe, if you have a family member who wants to listen to this for themselves, or they speak Spanish, or you want to share this video, I will be posting it afterward. You can send the link to them. And we'll be having this conversation in Spanish on Facebook at 6 o'clock Eastern next week. So just make sure you follow Informed Immigrant, and they can ask their questions directly there. So I think we're heading towards the end of the conversation. I'll make sure to like flip through and see if we had any questions we missed. But I do want to ask, in regards to the, with the pandemic, will folks be turned away at free testing sites?
No, right? So, I mean, I think that the tough thing, you know, free testing site is free testing site. There's no citizenship check, right? You know, unfortunately, the way they did this, we are hearing of cases where sort of people at private clinics have, you know, gotten asked for things like ID, or, you know, they've gotten bills after the fact. But you know what? There's plenty of testing sites. I mean, even though there were shortages at the beginning of the pandemic in all parts of the country, as long as you go, and if you go to a testing site and they ask you for ID or something that you don't have, just go to another one, right? Like there are enough testing sites. And something else that someone mentioned, I wanted to make sure to answer, and I wanted to make sure people know about the Keep Your Benefits website, but the issue of unemployment insurance. So a lot of immigrants are unemployed because they're sick or taking care of family members, or they lost their jobs. Unemployment insurance, again, if I went through and we could scroll, the benefits was not one of the benefits I mentioned. So totally safe to use unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is something that you've earned, and you have a right to, and no one can take that away from you. And you should feel totally free to use unemployment insurance and not worried that it's going to impact your ability to get a green card or your family member's ability to get a green card.
And Jackie, as I guess the last question that I think I've covered a few times, but to hear it from you, how can folks stay informed or find resources when it comes to public charge?
So what is very cool is that, often it was only if you were sort of in certain states. I don't know where people are calling in from different places, but, you had a lot of resources if you were in California or New York. But if you were in rural West Pennsylvania, you really didn't have a lot. And there are a lot of programs in every state where they've actually set up free immigration attorney services to help people screen people for public charge. But right now, there is a national website. It is called keepyourbenefits.org. And it is a website that, we're working to get it into more languages. Right now, it is in 3 languages. We've got it in Chinese and in Spanish and in English. And you can go to that website and you can get information in those different languages. We're working on, adding more different types of languages, but keepyourbenefits.org is a great resource. It's really simple. It's intended for community members. It's not like super wonky and legalese. So that is absolutely a piece. I saw someone asking if hospitals report if you use medical care for COVID-19. Absolutely not. I've never heard of that. I personally feel responsible. If someone asks me, is it safe to go to a hospital because of COVID-19? And I tell them it is, I consider that to be personally on me. You know what I mean? And I am telling you, we need to not let them scare us. I have lost too many people. We've lost too many people in our communities who are scared to get medical care. And it's literally killing us, right? So when I say it has to be safe for us to go to the hospital, I mean it. You know what I mean? And I think that we need to encourage our family members to not be scared, to know that we have a new administration, to know that while there have been many lies from Trump and ICE, that this is, a promise that they've kept, and that it's the right thing to do to get care. And it's a matter of life and death. This isn't, this is not something to be played with right now. And again, too many of us have lost family members because they've been scared to get care. And we really need to let them know that it's okay.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to grab onto that, is that we've talked a lot about how there's misinformation in the immigrant community, and there's a lot of fear. And so when we're able to, we answer questions and we talk about what folks should be concerned about and what they shouldn't and when they qualify for and don't. So when it comes to public charge, please share the resources that we're talking about, share this conversation, encourage them to join the conversation next week that's in Spanish, allow them to ask their questions. They can always reach out to our organization by messaging us, and even if we can't answer it, we'll direct you to a platform that could answer your question. I know the same goes for Jackie. If you guys reach out to NILC, this video will be posted afterward. You'll be able to find it on there. You can share it to your friends. If you need something that you need to read through, NILC has really good resources on their platform. Informed Immigrant also has an FAQ guide. We also point to other organizations and the resources that they have. We have a directory on there if you need to get in contact with an organization that's near you. You type in your zip code and you can find an organization there. So really there's a lot of information that we're trying to get out to the community. So we appreciate it when folks share that information to the folks that really need it, which are the ones that are on the ground and sometimes don't get access to this information or don't even know that it exists, and they buy what's being sent around in a WhatsApp group, or they see on Facebook, or the fear mongering that, as we talked about, is what this administration has been trying to do. So really, can't focus enough about, staying informed and sharing some of these resources. But I'm going to give it a few minutes to see if folks have other questions that Jackie can respond to. I know that I received one directly in the questions background in regards to Daca. I do want to remind folks that we have a live stream that will be happening on Friday at 6 o'clock Eastern, where Luis Cortes will be joining us. He's a managing partner at an organization. He'll be able to answer any of the questions that you may have. And it's an opportunity to talk to someone directly. But if you have any questions in regards to public charge or anything that has to do with the work that Jackie does, we're just going to give it a few more minutes to see if there's any questions that we haven't answered. And if I missed your question, you can just repeat it at the very end because I'm scrolling through to see if we've missed anything.
And there is no public charge test when you apply for DACA. That's another important thing to remember. But as also as a reminder, for DACA, you're not eligible for the benefits, you know what I mean, in most cases. So that's just an important thing to remember. But yeah, no public charge test for DACA, so you don't have to worry about that. And again, I think the biggest threat to our communities over the last few years has obviously been the Trump administration, Stephen Miller. That's the number one threat. But the second threat has also been, I did research about public charge in communities from Arkansas to California to Illinois, and the number one thing I heard was in Spanish we say the vecina chismosa, the gossipy neighbor, who went around spreading to everyone in their communities that, I heard that if you use Medicaid, they're going to deport your son. I heard, so if we can fight the vecina chismosa, if we can fight the gossipy neighbor, however you call it in your language, and you can get out there and you can tell people that citizens don't have to be scared, that green card holders don't have to be scared, and that families don't have to worry that if like a parent is applying for a green card, that their kids can access benefits, and that it's safe to get COVID-19 testing and treatment. Like if you can do that, you've actually helped fight, the Trump administration's campaign of fear and hate to try and tear apart our families and make us less healthy. So I know that it seems like a really small thing, but if you even tell one person that, you've done your job in fighting back public charge and in fighting back the Trump administration. And I urge you to join us in doing that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jackie. And then I think there's one question that I don't remember if we covered, but if not, I think it's a good reminder for folks. What about Medicare of unemployment benefits from COVID relief?
Yeah, so unemployment benefits don't count, things like that. And again, in New York, and I worked really hard to get healthcare for immigrants in New York, that doesn't count. It's only emergency Medicaid doesn't count. It's only if you get normal Medicaid that counts. And again, if you're undocumented, you are not eligible for regular Medicaid. So very important to know that if you got emergency Medicaid for COVID-19, that doesn't count. It only counts if you got regular Medicaid. And again, I don't know how you would get regular. There's very few situations in which if you don't already have a green card, you would be able to get regular Medicaid. And I think there's a lot of people that are confused because we use the terms emergency Medicaid and Medicaid interchangeably. Emergency Medicaid is really for people who are undocumented and so that they're not eligible for regular Medicaid, and emergency Medicaid does not count for public charge.
We do have another question that's saying, what type of evidence do you typically provide to show? I'm not sure.
Evidence for the evidence, you did cut off a little bit, but so I think you're asking about evidence for the public charge test. Look, if you're facing a public charge test, you should be talking to an attorney, right? Like you should be talking to an immigration attorney. One of the only good things, well, you could say whether more attorneys and lawyers is a good thing or a bad thing, but one of the good things that's come out of the Trump era is that there has been a lot of funding for pro bono or low cost immigration legal services for immigrants. Don't go it alone. Reach out, let us know how we can connect you to an attorney. If you're actually in a position, most people don't have to worry about public charge because they're not facing a green card test, and they don't have to worry about it for citizenship. But if you are facing a green card test, that is when you want to reach out to an attorney. And we do have a lot of resources for folks. Don't try and study immigration law by reading, WebMD and, the Google. Yeah. And I read it on Reddit, so it's fine. That's almost worse than the gossipy neighbor. You know what I mean? Like, this is one case where you really want to trust a professional, and we do, and BIA accredited reps and so forth. And that there are resources that there haven't always been in terms of funding for access to legal services.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out though, and I say this all the time, that every immigration case is very unique. And so when you look at some of this stuff and you're like, oh, I don't think it qualifies for me, or maybe this isn't for my family member or whatever, that sometimes it's best to consult an attorney or consult an organization that provide free consultations for their cases or low cost. And sometimes you might not even know that you might qualify for a relief or not. But because cases are so individual, this is why we encourage folks to please reach out to an accredited organization or get in contact with an immigration lawyer to make sure that they get all of their questions answered. But we did get a question about, and I think you talked about this earlier, but it was talking about getting health insurance during the pandemic and whether that would be a public charge.
Yes, no, again, so if you are getting treatment related to COVID-19, that will not be counted. And again, as a reminder, we're fighting this like crazy. And starting January
Hmm.
20th, like what I'm spending right now, my time doing is 14 hours a day talking with the Biden transition team, trying to get them to undo this rule. And we hope that they're going to actually announce on day one an executive order saying that they're going to get rid of public charge. So I think that that's just important to know, but that even under Trump, they've been very clear that getting care and treatment for COVID-19 does not count. I also am looking at a person that says, my lawyer says I can't in Massachusetts get the state's healthcare even if I pay for it. That's complicated in the sense that undocumented people are not allowed to buy insurance. You're not, if you're a green card holder and you haven't been here for 5 years, you can't get Medicaid. And I'm not speaking about your specific case, but I'm just telling you generally. However, if you are lawfully present, you can buy private health insurance on the marketplace. And so I think that maybe one of the problems that we have is that there's immigration law and there's healthcare law, and very often, and I tell you, I'm in these spaces all the time, you have people who know healthcare that know nothing about immigration, and people who know immigration who know nothing about healthcare. So actually, a lot of attorneys actually have been giving some bad advice. One of the things that we've also been, the other problem we have is immigration attorneys who are only worried about winning their immigration cases, and they've often counseled people to get their families off of everything because they're being super conservative. And we've been trying to educate, we're in the National Immigration Law Center, and we've been trying to tell people, like,
Hmm.
look, they're only trying to win their immigration case, and often they're actually incorrect about what counts. And also, and I hate to say this, but like, dead people don't win immigration cases. So when you tell someone, I know it's a really extreme thing to say, but when you tell someone, don't
Yeah.
go get COVID-19 treatment because an immigration attorney told you that, even though the government has been really clear that COVID-19 treatment doesn't count against your case, that's just the attorney only thinking about their case, right? And not the health of your family. And so I think that that's just a really important thing to remember. And that, yeah, undocumented people can't buy Obamacare, but lawfully present people can. And in places like Massachusetts, where that person is, there's a place called MIRA in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Immigrant Rights Alliance, that's really great. There's tons of resources. If you're lucky enough to be in a place like Massachusetts, and you're a green card holder, get in touch with them, get the facts right. I think that's another important thing too. And if you have specific state questions, do get in touch. But keepyourbenefits.org is a great starting place for everyone.
Yeah, and as a reminder for folks who are looking for an organization near them, they can answer some questions, whether it be about public charge or just immigration in general. You can reach out to an Informed Immigrant. We can help find an organization near you, or you can go on to informedimmigrant.com, type in your zip code, and it'll tell you all of the immigrant-friendly organizations that exist near you and how you can get in contact with them. But in regards to public charge, if you're looking for anything that Jackie covered today, you can find that information on Milk's website. You can find it on informedimmigrant.com. There's an FAQ on there. If you're looking for a Spanish version of this conversation, we'll be talking about that next week on Facebook for Informed Immigrant, and Jackie will be joining us to answer any of the questions that you have. So I encourage you to share it with folks. But I think as we're reaching towards the end of this conversation, Jackie, quick reminder for folks what they need to remember for public charge. And then, as always, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm looking forward to next week's conversation as well.
Absolutely. So do you want me to close out with a quick top lines?
Yeah.
All right. I've said it a million times. Public charge does not apply to citizens. Public charge only gets applied when you're applying to enter the country or when you're applying for a green card. Public charge does not apply to green card holders. Public charge does not apply to family members who are using benefits when one of their family members is applying for a green card. And more importantly, public charge does not apply for COVID-19 healthcare and treatment. It is safe to go get tested. It is safe to go to a clinic. ICE is not conducting enforcement activities. And let's go out there and keep our families safe. Let's get our healthcare taken care of. Let's beat this pandemic and let's beat this Trump administration. And just so you guys know, you'll be doing your part by getting the facts out there. And we as the National Immigration Law Center and Informed Immigrant will be doing their parts, and we'll also be continuing to fight in the courts. And we're going to be looking to Biden to get rid of this public charge rule on day one. Yep. So, get that word out too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you everyone for staying tuned and joining our conversations and all the great questions that everyone submitted. Stay tuned for Friday's conversation to talk about DACA. For more public charge information, go on to informedimmigrant.com where you can find milk resources as well. And then next week, the Spanish version on Facebook. So Jackie, thank you so much for taking time out of your night to have a conversation with us and answer some questions. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone. Be
Bye-bye.
safe out there.